I was just trying to do something nice. That's the part that really gets me. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the sleek touchscreen of our overpriced smart fridge, about to order Sarah's usual favorites, organic Greek yogurt, almond butter, and those ridiculous $12 protein bars she swore by. The fridge, of course, had its own ideas. A new item had been added to the shopping list. Not by me. Not by Sarah, at least not openly. Prenatal vitamins. The expensive kind, the ones a high-end OBGYN would recommend, packed with DHA and methylfolate. My first thought wasn't suspicion. It was confusion. A mistake? Maybe some algorithmic glitch? I tapped on the item, bringing up the last purchases. The same vitamins had been ordered twice before. Once last month. Once 2 months before that. A cold, creeping unease slithered up my spine. I stared at the fridge as if it had personally betrayed me. Sarah and I hadn't been trying for a baby. Hell, we hadn't even been intimate in. I stopped counting at 6 months. Her reasons had been vague, ever-shifting. Stress, work, hormones. Intimacy is a choice, Dylan. She had snapped once when I brought it up. Apparently, so was deception. I took a picture of the vitamins on my phone. Then, on impulse, I sent it to Dr. Patel, my personal dietitian. No context, just a simple question. Hey, what's special about these? Her reply came faster than I expected. That's a premium prenatal blend, designed for women already pregnant. Helps with fetal development. Why? Fetal development. A rushing sound filled my ears, like the ocean pulling back before a tidal wave. Sarah wasn't pregnant. She couldn't be. Could she? I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe there was a rational explanation. Maybe Sarah had some private health scare she hadn't told me about. Maybe the vitamins weren't even for her. But I didn't believe that. Not after what happened next. The vitamins were still on my mind when I sat down at my desk later that evening. I hadn't planned to dig, but when I opened our shared bank account to check on a pending transaction, something else caught my eye. An unfamiliar charge. Solace Wellness and Sports Club, $275. My stomach tightened. I knew that name. It was an ultra-exclusive gym, the kind that catered to high-profile clients who didn't want to sweat next to the common folk. A place Sarah had always dismissed as overpriced nonsense for trophy wives. And yet, she'd signed up. I clicked through the transaction details. The charge wasn't for a single session. It was a membership fee, meaning she'd been going for a while. I checked my phone, flipping through Sarah's messages from the last few months. Nothing about a gym. No complaints about sore muscles. No gloating about hitting her fitness goals, the way she used to when she actually cared about training. So what the hell was she doing there? I didn't have to wonder for long. That night, when she was asleep, I grabbed her keyring from the kitchen counter and took the tiny silver fob attached to it, the electronic access key for the gym. Then I drove to Solace Wellness myself. The front desk attendant barely looked up when I handed it over. Need a copy of my usage records, I said casually. Just checking my workout progress. She yawned, swiped the fob, and clicked through her screen. All right, mister. She glanced down at the name attached to the account. Not my name, Sarah's. I watched as she hesitated, but I gave her my best impatient husband look. She sighed. Fine. Do you want a printout? Yes. I wanted hard evidence. I wanted something to prove that my gut wasn't leading me in the wrong direction. She handed me a single sheet of paper. I stared at the dates and times. Sarah had been going to the gym 3 times a week, every week, for the past 9 months. And she wasn't working out alone. I knew that because next to every entry time for Sarah, there was another one identical down to the exact minute. Brandon Gallagher. Our neighbor. Our married neighbor. I clenched the paper so hard it crumpled in my fist. Brandon. The guy who was always just outside when Sarah got home. Just available when she needed help carrying groceries. Just friendly enough to always strike up a conversation when I wasn't around. I'd ignored it before. Dismissed it. Told myself I was being paranoid. Not anymore. This wasn't coincidence. This was intentional. Walter didn't ask unnecessary questions. That's what I liked about him. He was an old-school private investigator. Former military. Built like a man who didn't tolerate nonsense, and just paranoid enough to be damn good at his job. I called him 2 days after I got the gym records. Gave him the basics. My wife, a suspicious gym schedule, a neighbor who was a little too friendly. "You want the full package?" he asked. "I want the truth." Walter chuckled. "Truth's gonna cost you, and it's usually ugly." I wired him the retainer before I could talk myself out of it. 3 days later, Walter called me back. "Got something for you," he said. His voice was flat, businesslike, but I could hear the edge underneath. Pity, maybe, or maybe just the tone of a man who had seen this exact scenario play out too many times. He sent me a video file. I was sitting in my car when I hit play. The footage was crisp, high quality for a street-level camera. The angle was perfect, across from the private parking lot behind Sarah's office, the one she always used. Walter had planted a discreet motion-activated camera in an old utility pole, angled directly at the entrance. Timestamp: 6:17 p.m. Sarah stepped out of the building, glancing around like she was making sure she was alone. She wasn't. Brandon was waiting by her car. I knew it was him before he even turned. I recognized his cocky stance, the way he leaned against the driver's side door like he belonged there. Sarah hesitated. Then, in a moment so casual it made me sick, she stepped forward, wrapping her arms around him. Not a quick hug, not a friendly gesture. She melted into him. Brandon's hands slid to her lower back, then lower. He kissed her hair, whispered something in her ear. Sarah smiled, like she hadn't spent the last 6 months gaslighting me, telling me I was paranoid for wondering why she was so distant, like she hadn't recoiled every time I tried to touch her, like she hadn't told me that intimacy was a choice. She'd just chosen someone else. The video kept playing. They didn't leave together, didn't make it obvious. Brandon walked to his car first, drove off like it was a regular Tuesday evening. Sarah waited a few minutes, then did the same. Clean, practiced. This wasn't their first time. My fingers curled into fists. My jaw locked so hard it hurt. I sat there in my car, gripping my phone, watching the loop of my wife embracing another man like I was the outsider, like I was the one intruding on their moment. Walter had been right. Truth was ugly. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. I thought nothing could twist the knife deeper than that video. Then watching my wife melt into another man's arms while she treated me like some unwanted obligation at home. I was wrong. Walter wasn't done digging. A week after the parking lot footage, he called me again. "Got something else," he said. "This one's gonna sting." I was already numb. "Just send it." It wasn't a video this time. It was a bank statement. Sarah's personal account. The one she always insisted on keeping separate from our shared finances, under the excuse of maintaining independence. I stared at the numbers. For the past 7 months, she had been making regular transfers, large ones, thousands of dollars each time. The memo line on every transfer: personal contribution to family expenses. That was what she had told me. That was what she had written on our damn budget spreadsheet when I asked her why she was moving money around. Except Walter had inside contacts, people who could access the raw transaction details, including where the money actually ended up. And it sure as hell wasn't going into our savings. The recipient? Brandon Gallagher. My jaw locked, my vision blurred with rage. Walter had attached copies of the checks themselves. Physical proof. Brandon's full name, his signature, his address. Sarah hadn't just been sleeping with the guy. She had been funding his goddamn home renovations. His name might have been on the account, but the money had my wife's handwriting all over it. I clenched the papers so hard they crumpled. 7 months of betrayal, funded by my own goddamn household income. The cold rage that settled over me wasn't like the first waves of anger. This wasn't blind fury. This wasn't some knee-jerk reaction of a man who just found out his wife was screwing the neighbor. This was different, calculated, sharp, surgical. Sarah thought she had control, thought she had options, thought she could keep playing her little game while I stayed blissfully ignorant. She had no idea that her choices had already sealed her fate. I wasn't just going to leave her. I was going to burn everything she built to the ground. Sarah must have felt me pulling away. That's the only explanation for why she suddenly started acting nice again. Not affectionate, not apologetic, but careful, measured, like a woman who knew she had to keep up appearances. I let her play the role. At dinner one night, she casually dropped, I was thinking we should take a weekend trip, just the two of us. A month ago, I might have jumped at the offer, desperate for any sign that she still wanted us. Now I knew exactly what she wanted. A distraction. I leaned back in my chair, swirling my whiskey, and gave her an easy smile. Sounds nice. I'll check my schedule. She didn't expect that answer. I saw it in the way her fingers tensed slightly around her fork. Good. Let her wonder. Let her worry. But it wasn't the forced intimacy that caught my attention. It was the bag she had started carrying everywhere. A slim leather satchel, one I hadn't seen before. She never let it out of her sight. Even at home, it was always within arm's reach. Purse I would have ignored. But this was different. One night, while she was in the shower, I had my chance. Her bag was on the dining table. I moved fast, flipping it open and snapping pictures of the contents before putting everything back exactly as it was. Then I stepped away like nothing had happened. Later, alone in my office, I pulled up the images on my phone and felt my pulse slow. Among the receipts and random notes, there was one folder. Thin, blue, a standard medical file. The label read, Prenatal Consultation Plan. My breath left my lungs in one sharp exhale. The pages inside? Scheduled OBGYN appointments. Ultrasound dates. Estimated due date, 3.5 months from now. Sarah wasn't planning to have a baby. She was already pregnant. And considering the last time we had been intimate was over 6 months ago, the math was undeniable. The child wasn't mine. Sarah had been gaslighting me for months, feeding me half-truths about her distance, our failing intimacy, her personal choices. And all along, she had been carrying his baby. The sickness in my gut was gone, replaced by something darker, sharper. I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to make sure that when I was done, she wouldn't have a single excuse left to hide behind. Walter didn't waste time. He worked in facts, in patterns, and the pattern he found made everything sickeningly clear. She's been covering her tracks, he told me over the phone. But she's not as smart as she thinks. I already knew that. Sarah thought she was careful, but she underestimated the little things, the digital fingerprints, the automatic logs she never even considered. Walter had tapped into our smart home system, specifically the smart plugs connected to our garage outlets. They controlled the car charger for Sarah's Tesla. Look at the charging records, he said, sending me a spreadsheet. I opened the file, and there it was. For months, her Tesla followed a routine. She'd get home, plug it in, and it would start charging automatically around midnight. Consistent, predictable, until 3 months ago. That's when the gap started. Once or twice a week, the car wasn't plugged in overnight. The charging log stopped completely on certain nights, always late evening, always resuming early morning. And then there was the GPS tracker issue. Sarah had switched off location services on those exact nights. The only way she could do that, manually disabling the car's GPS through the Tesla settings. She wasn't just sneaking around. She was actively covering her tracks. I clenched my jaw so hard it ached. Walter kept talking. She doesn't want the car tracked, but she still needs it charged. So she plugs it in when she gets back. Early morning, before you wake up. She thinks she's being clever. But smart plugs record when the charging starts. I scrolled through the logs, watching the timestamps tell their own story. 3:54 a.m., 4:17 a.m., 5:02 a.m. Always the same pattern. Gone at night, back right before dawn. Sarah had turned our home into a pit stop before climbing into bed next to me like nothing had happened. The knowledge settled in my chest like a live wire. She had no idea I knew. No idea that her meticulous little cover-ups had only made it easier for me to prove what she was doing. No idea that every fake excuse, every lie, every missing night was being logged, timestamped, and archived. Walter was right. She wasn't as smart as she thought. But I was smarter. And I wasn't just watching anymore. I was waiting. Sarah was meticulous. I give her that. She covered her tracks, played the role, and kept her real plans buried under layers of manipulation. But she wasn't perfect. And I only needed one crack to break everything apart. That crack was in her home office. Sarah treated it like her personal vault. Locked when she wasn't inside. Always organized, always pristine. I'd never had a reason to go snooping before. But now, Now, I had every reason. That Friday, she left for one of her mysterious late meetings, which, judging by Walter's data, meant she'd be gone until well after midnight. I had hours. I used a spare key to get inside, moved carefully, left no fingerprints, no signs of disturbance. Then I found it, a legal folder, tucked neatly in her desk drawer, under a stack of real estate documents. I opened it, and froze. The title on the first page hit me like a gut punch. Establishing Paternity, Legal Considerations and Disputes. I flipped through the pages, my hands tightening with every word. Strategies for preventing involuntary paternity tests. Legal loopholes for protecting parental rights without DNA confirmation. State-by-state regulations on contested fatherhood claims. And then, the worst part, a printed email exchange. From Sarah's personal lawyer. Subject line? Contingency plans, paternity questions. I skimmed it fast. Her lawyer was laying out different legal protections in case her husband, contested fatherhood of the child. It was right there in black and white. Sarah knew the baby wasn't mine, and she was already preparing to keep me legally tied to it anyway. I forced myself to breathe, forced myself to control the rage clawing at my throat. This wasn't just betrayal. This was calculated, planned. Sarah wasn't just screwing around behind my back. She was engineering my downfall, setting up a future where I'd be trapped, financially obligated to raise another man's child while she kept me in the dark. I closed the folder, placed everything exactly as it was. Then I called Walter. "We need confirmation," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I need a DNA test." Walter didn't hesitate. "I'll handle it." He wasn't bluffing. The next morning, he forged an official request through a medical records inquiry service. A few well-placed credentials, a digital paper trail made to look legitimate. Within 48 hours, we'd have access to Sarah's prenatal records. We'd know exactly who the father was. And when that proof was in my hands, Sarah wouldn't see me coming. I wanted to see what she would do when backed into a corner. Sarah had been careful, too careful. Every move she made was calculated, every lie rehearsed. But I knew one thing about cheaters. They always have a backup plan. So I set a trap. I made it seem like I was trying, like I still wanted us, like I was some clueless husband, desperately hoping to fix a marriage that was already 6 feet under. A romantic dinner, high-end steakhouse, reservations under her name. I let her believe it was her moment, her opportunity to manipulate me, to reel me back in just enough to keep control. And then, an hour before we were supposed to meet, I sent her a text. "Got stuck at work. Can't make dinner. Sorry. Let's talk later." I knew exactly what she'd do next. Walter was already in place. A tiny, discreet audio recorder planted under the table she would sit at. A table I had specifically requested during the reservation. I stayed home, waited, poured myself a drink and let the minutes crawl by. An hour later, Walter sent me the file. I pressed play. The restaurant noise hummed softly in the background. Then came Sarah's voice, frustrated. "Hushed. He canceled. I don't know, something at work. But it's fine." A pause. Then a second voice, Brandon. Smug, confident, like a man who had won. "Told you, babe. He's checked out. He's not even suspicious." I let the words settle in my chest. He thought I was blind. Sarah sighed. I hate all this sneaking around. I just want it to be over." Over? She wanted me out of the picture. Brandon laughed. "We're almost there. Once the baby's here, we'll have everything sorted. You'll have full custody, and he'll have no choice but to pay up." I gripped my glass so hard my knuckles turned white. That smug bastard was already planning my future. Planning how I would be financially responsible for his child. Sarah lowered her voice. "And you're sure the paperwork?" Brandon cut her off. "It's solid. My guy says it's airtight. If Dylan tries to contest, it'll get dragged out for years. Trust me, babe, he won't even fight it. He'll just want out." I exhaled slowly. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a goddamn conspiracy. They had already mapped out my fate, confident that I'd roll over and let them use me. I smiled. Not out of amusement, not out of anger, but because I finally had them exactly where I wanted them. Walter didn't need to dig for this one. Fell right into my lap. I was coming back from the gym, An actual workout, not the kind Sarah had been attending with Brandon. When I saw him in his front yard. Brandon. He was playing with his dog. A golden retriever I had seen a few times before but never paid attention to. Until I noticed the new tag hanging from its collar. He knelt down to scratch behind its ears, and for just a second, the silver tag flipped over, catching the sunlight. I froze. Something about the way it gleamed, it felt off. I stepped closer, pretending to check my phone, angling myself just enough to read the engraving. And there it was. If lost, call 555-738-4901. Sarah's number. Not Brandon's. Sarah's. The weight of it hit me all at once. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a life they had already built together. A life I was never supposed to see. I could almost hear her voice in my head. That sickeningly sweet, condescending tone she used when she wanted to gaslight me into compliance. You're just imagining things, Dylan. You're paranoid. Yeah. Then why the hell is my wife's number listed as the emergency contact for another man's dog? I kept walking, kept my face blank. But inside I was laughing. Not the kind of laugh that comes from something funny. The kind that erupts when you realize you've already won. Still, I wanted proof. So I did what any rational man would do. I called the vet clinic. I posed as Brandon. Said I needed to update my dog's emergency contact information. The receptionist was more than happy to help. She pulled up the file, confirmed the details. Primary contact, Brandon Gallagher. Secondary contact, Sarah Gallagher. Sarah Gallagher. Not Dylan's wife. Not Sarah Carter. Sarah Gallagher. As if she had already mentally made the switch. As if she had already decided her last name would match his. I ended the call. Sat in my car. Took a slow, deep breath. Then I grinned. Because now I didn't just have proof. I had leverage. Sarah had been so careful. So damn careful. She covered her tracks, deleted messages, fabricated excuses. But there was one thing she couldn't hide. DNA. I didn't need a court order. I didn't need a confrontation. All I needed was a toothbrush and a little patience. The opportunity came on a Sunday morning. Sarah had gone out for brunch with the girls. A lie so tired it barely needed effort to see through. I stayed home, pretending to be engrossed in some meaningless weekend project, waiting for my moment. The second she left, I got to work. I went straight to our bathroom, the one she insisted on keeping separate from mine. Her toothbrush was exactly where she always left it, resting neatly in the holder like it wasn't about to become her downfall. I plucked a few strands of her hair from the brush, careful to keep the follicles intact. Then I grabbed a used tissue from the trash. Disgusting, but necessary. And finally, the coup de grace. A prenatal vitamin bottle, still coated with the oils of her fingertips. I bagged it all, sealed it, and drove straight to Walter. He didn't ask questions. He just took the samples, made a call, and got me in touch with his guy at a private lab. A rush job? The tech asked when I handed over the materials. I pulled out my wallet. I don't care what it costs. I want results now. He nodded. Check back in 24 hours. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I had doubts. I knew the truth before the test was even done. But because my mind was already racing ahead to the next step. By the time the results came in, I had plans. The lab tech barely looked at me when he handed over the folder. It's not yours, he said bluntly. 0% probability. I exhaled slowly. There it was. The last piece of the puzzle. Sarah had spent months treating me like I was some oblivious idiot. A fool who would never put the pieces together. Now I had everything. The affair. The financial fraud. The secret pregnancy. The DNA proof. I had enough to destroy her life in ways she hadn't even imagined. And tomorrow I'd set it all in motion. I arrived at the courthouse early. Not because I was nervous, far from it. I just wanted to watch. To watch Sarah walk into that building, oblivious to the fact that her entire world was about to collapse. Walter had outdone himself. Every piece of evidence was neatly organized: bank statements, gym records, hidden cameras, GPS data, DNA test results. The works. And, of course, the photo of Sarah's growing baby bump. It wasn't just a picture. It was Exhibit A. When she finally showed up, she looked put together, like a woman who thought she still had control. A perfectly ironed dress, soft makeup, that calculated, almost smug expression. Brandon wasn't with her. Of course not. He was too much of a coward to show his face. Sarah spotted me sitting at the far end of the hall. For the first time in months, she actually smiled. Like she thought I was here to negotiate. Like she thought I was weak. I let her have that moment. Let her believe it. Then the bailiff opened the doors. The last stand. Sarah started losing the second my lawyer laid the documents on the judge's desk. I didn't have to say much. The proof spoke for itself. Every lie she had told, every secret she had buried. It was all there in black and white. Her lawyer tried to spin it, of course. Tried to salvage the wreckage. She was under emotional distress. So distressed she had a 9-month affair? My lawyer cut in. There's no evidence that. The DNA test results say otherwise. And that's when Sarah realized. She turned to me, her face going pale. Finally understanding. I wasn't here to fight for her. I was here to bury her. Her hands went to her stomach, as if that would somehow save her. As if her pregnancy was a shield. It wasn't. It was the final proof of her betrayal. The judge skimmed the documents, sighed, and spoke the words that sealed her fate. Irrevocable divorce granted. No alimony. No contested assets. Nothing. Sarah wouldn't get a single cent. Brandon could have her. And the mess she'd made. The final goodbye. I stood, buttoned my jacket, slid the final document across the table. Sarah stared at it. Petition for irrevocable divorce. No second chances. No renegotiations. No way back. Her lips parted, like she wanted to say something. To beg, to plead, to explain. I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked out of that courthouse. And for the first time in months, I didn't look back.